So how can a person begin that examination? Because I think what you said is very insightful, which is from the outside, these can be indistinguishable, right? You can have an individual who looks like they are doing remarkably well. Again, by any metric. I don't just mean financially, but I mean in terms of actual achievement. But it could be fueled by fear, by anger, by insecurity, by any of these other things. And you can have an individual who's achieving the same things or frankly less, but it's coming from this generative place. So if an individual listening says, hey, how can I take this first diagnostic step and evaluate my own drive, what would you say to them?
The first thing to do is to look inside oneself. Like, how do I feel, right? This is where sometimes I talk a lot about a life narrative, and a person could just start, you can start writing, you can start talking with someone, you can start introspecting. That there are ways of taking stock of what is going on inside of me. Am I being kind to myself? What's the voice inside of me saying to me? Do I feel good about any of this, right? Is any of this what I want?
But let's stop there for a second, Paul, because that's not an easy question to necessarily answer. I mean, I think I want to dig into this because it can be very difficult to answer that at a deep level, because sometimes the superficial answer is so obvious, right? If you have everything, if you have material success, your knee-jerk answer would be, of course, this is what I want. So how do you go deeper into that question to what you're talking about, which is the look inside?
And then you use more specific tools. So what do you say to yourself when you're alone? Is there something that you say to yourself over and over? If you make a mistake, what do you say to yourself then? Is there an urge in you to be helpful to other people when you see them around you, right? If someone stumbles in front of you, do you feel like you want to move forward to help that person, right? These are the ways in. These are the ways to give us answers about how we feel about ourselves. And there was a period of time 7-8 years ago where I would, for some period, a week or so, would see people who had very, very high levels of success that from the outside looked as if they must be happy, right? Look at all of this, right? And when I would stop doing that, I came back and I would do clinical work on a unit that takes care of people who don't have insurance, many of whom are indigent, not all, who have drug and alcohol problems. So the opposite end of the socioeconomic spectrum, and I swear to you that this is true, I could find no difference in overall happiness between the two groups. So someone who looked to have it all would feel, if I don't have that next achievement, it all goes away, right? So the person isn't owning what they have earned for themselves. And this is a theme inside of me. So the person may have made a lot of money and now they don't have to worry about being in need, or they may have achieved at their chosen art form, but they're so afraid that if the next thing doesn't go right, it'll all be taken away, or they'll feel ashamed of themselves. This goes on a lot in people who are high achieving. It's like, what have I done for myself lately, right? And if I haven't done something good enough, I can't feel good enough about myself. There is so much of that. Whereas I could see people who from the outside literally had nothing, who would be saying, when I get out of here, I'm going to do it differently, right? I'm going to do it better. I'm going to go see this person I really miss who is helpful to me. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to keep myself away from what got me in here in the first place. And they might have an enjoyable story or memory to say. I remember one point meeting someone who was living behind a bush under bad conditions, who was far, far happier than the vast majority of people I had seen over the previous several days. And the truth is, we are often running from something or trying to achieve something that makes us safe in the world. And all of a sudden, we're going to feel better about ourselves. And what we really need to do is honor that we are human. And what is going on inside of us is so important. And if we are willing to look at that, we're willing to ask the questions, what do I say to myself? How do I feel about myself versus other people, right? Do I feel like a fraud? Am I afraid everything will be taken away from me? Every time I drop something, do I say, what an idiot, inside of myself? Like, what is going on inside of me? Do I feel like I have an openness of spirit to new things or people who are different from me? Like, we can ask ourselves these questions, but we have to stop feeling that what we adorn ourselves with is what brings us happiness. Then we can get to this owning what is ours. So that person who is going to try and put a roof over their head when they leave, right, can own what's theirs, which is the tenacity to have what survived behind the bush, right? Survived and lived in that way and maintained a good spirit. And often these are people who are helpful to other people and are looking out for people around them. Like, that is something to feel so good about as you strive for what comes next, right? Just as someone who has worked and learned and studied, could feel good about the achievements they have, or someone who goes to a difficult job that doesn't provide them with satisfaction, that they feel is backbreaking labor and underpaid, but they go and do that and they take home a salary that supports a family and puts a roof over people's heads, feel proud of that, right? When we don't feel good about ourselves, often we are out of kilter with the generative drive within us. That is absolutely a part of what makes people unhappy. But also coming along with that is not owning what is ours. And how many people who've raised families, right, done things that are so impressive from the outside, have told me over the years that, oh, they're not worth anything. They didn't make enough money. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. And it's not what matters. Right? It is not what matters within us. It is being the best that we can be and honoring the drive inside of us to live and to create.
How would you make the case to somebody who's listening to this and says, Paul, I get what you're saying, but there's no way that if I had to choose between those two extremes, meaning I live behind a bush, but, I have some sort of happiness, but I have nothing, no material possessions, right, no status in society, versus I could be incredibly successful in the eyes of society and with it have all of the comforts that come from that success, mm-hmm, all of the wealth. But you'll tell me that I'm unhappy. Someone listening to us might not be able to even wrap their head around what you're saying, mm-hmm, and they would, mm-hmm, and because they might be right somewhere in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. They're clearly, right, they're not living on the street, but they're struggling, right? Mm-hmm. And they believe that their struggle is because they don't have something greater, mm-hmm, or even, mm-hmm, they acknowledge it and say, yeah, but if I had to choose between those two, I'd rather have all the comfort of the world, mm-hmm, materially, and be miserable. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, it's a silly question, but how would you make the case to them that, A, it's not a zero-sum game, and that's a false choice, so we'll come back to that. But more importantly, even in that, right, extreme choice, why is that not the wise choice?
Well, I would say get to know people in both categories better, right? Mm-hmm. If you're in the middle, because I know what I would choose. I mean, I would absolutely choose that person who doesn't have any material possessions. If I were making the choice for myself, like the selfish choice is to choose that person. I don't want to be the other person, right? Because I know that's not happy. I see where that goes, right? I see where the dissatisfaction leads, and I don't want that, right? I would much rather have within me the spirit, right? That makes me feel like I can do something, I can make some change, because we all need the basic minimum in order to have some safety and satisfaction, like a roof over our head, enough to eat, right? But oftentimes, if you give a person a little bit of help, they can go off and do that, right? If I were that person getting some help so that maybe now I can move my life forward, I would feel an enthusiasm about that. I can make things better. I can have the minimum that I need. And from there, what is it that I choose to build? When we look at measures of satisfaction, societies even today who are by and large hunter-gatherer societies, or the societies that we from the outside think have nothing, are often happier than we are. So like, there's your proof, right? There is your proof. So I think as a society, we have so much plenty that we can look after people better. I always say we live in a society that runs ahead so quickly that we're always trampling people along the way, right? And one, it's just not right to do. And two, any of us can be in that group of people who has something really difficult happened to them, was up against something really, really big, and then something else really, really big, and gets to a place where like we need a helping hand up. And any of us could be that person, or someone we love could be that person. And even if that weren't the case, it's just not right. And even if that weren't the case, it's not even economically efficient, right? Like, help people to be productive members of society, right? That's important economically. And of course, beyond economics is the human part that matters, but even just the dollars and cents of it tells us help people up when they need help. We can do more for people to give them an opportunity to make a life for themselves that can feel productive and contain happiness within it. And if we do this for all of us, we give all of us an opportunity to have the generative drive within us realized, as that may be for us, someone who's, very interested in academic learning and success, may think, look, I like that. I like when I get an accolade. I like when I learn something. And then maybe they go off and they start building businesses and they feel great about that. Like, that's wonderful. That is wonderful if that's what that person feels good about. There are also people who live good, productive lives, and they're good neighbors to the people around them, and they take care of children if they've chosen to be responsible for children. These aren't people who should feel any less good about themselves, right? And the irony in the world is that often what I see are both groups of people are not feeling good about themselves. They're not earning what is theirs. The person who went off and studied and created and can't feel good about the wealth they generated that now may be good for people around them, but they don't feel good about that. Or the people who struggled and worked and made good lives for themselves don't feel that they have enough. And I see this as coming along with this idea about aging, that, we should feel so bad about getting old, and we should feel so bad about whatever we can identify in ourselves that isn't what we think it should be if we look from the outside. And there is a real simplicity in just sitting with ourselves and introspecting, or sitting with someone that we're talking to, or writing with a pen, or being in a therapy room of, look, let me think about me. Because the truth is, all of us are so different as to be really and truly unique. So if we take ourselves out of how we try and tether ourselves to all the shoulds around us and say, let's talk about your life, and let's talk about what your experience of life has been, your experience of being in the world, and trying to have some healthy control over a world that's difficult to control. Let's talk about that. And it's those discussions that lead people to interesting decisions. Sometimes they're decisions to leave a very high-paying job for a lower-paying job, but then the depression goes away, or the substance use goes away. Sometimes it's a decision to strive for more that leads a person ultimately to achieve external measures of success. But we don't know what that is. We don't know what that is. But if we start thinking about it and talking about it, we also go back to the basics of how are you taking care of your body. It's going to be very difficult to feel good if one is not taking care of the basics of their physical function. We get down to the first principles, physical health, the things that contribute to lifespan, health span, right? Cognitive health and emotional health. But we have to go back to the first principles of, like, who are you? And let's talk about your story, right? Because that understanding is what leads to the next decisions. And the next decisions are not obvious from where we stand now.